Hello everybody, this is Brian O'Haron. This is our really our 11th program, but since we're switching to a different time frame, this show will be shown on Friday night between 8 and 9 o'clock for the next 13 weeks. It's number one on the new schedule. So I hope you'll turn in. I will put a few signs up around town so people know that. I am recording this a bit early because it helps down here at the studio. So next week I'll be recording on Tuesdays. Today I'm recording on Mondays. So if anything major happens during the week, you won't hear about it on this program. And then what I want to try to do eventually is introduce one of the programs, the whole hour devoted to one of the new things happening in town. For example, the Tort Museum or the Wall of America or some of the great things that are happening in the town. We'll get some people in to talk about it if we can, and we'll try to concentrate one show a month on that. With that, I now want to go to the agenda. Oh, no, first I got to explain my problem here, which is the reason I put the picture up in the back of me. I made a little mistake, and I called some relatives for information this week. And when I had my great-grandfather's picture up 2 weeks ago, I said he was an Orangeman, and he wasn't an Orangeman. He was from Dublin, he and his family, and the hats weren't orange. They were really gold. The oranges were really a treat, so I misinterpreted that, and I apologize for that. But anyway, he was a great guy, and I'm thankful that he was my great-grandfather. With that, now I'll switch to the agenda, and tell you what we're going to talk about on this program, or Friday night's program. First, I'll make some comments, and there'll be quite a few comments this week. And then a financial update, which will also be have quite a bit of meat in it this week. Some notices, which I hope will be of value to you. The major progress status board, which hasn't changed much as a result of the selectmen meeting, but the major decision status board has changed quite a bit, and I will put that up and we'll go through that, because a lot of decisions were made at the last selectmen meeting, which was after my last program. So there's a lot of interesting things here. And then I'll put up the instrumentation chart, which hasn't changed, but I do want to talk a bit about it this week. And then I did some analysis on the last selectmen meeting, all positive stuff. And I did an example of how I think the selectmen meeting, Brian's view on how the selectmen meeting probably, what the agenda should be. Pardon me. That doesn't mean everybody will agree with it, but it's my 2 cents, hoping to influence the selectmen. Then I also did what I consider to be an example of what the town manager's report should contain, and each meeting, so that we can probably raise that whole meeting to a higher level and to talk about more what I would call policy issues than non-policy issues. So we'll talk a bit about that in analysis piece. And then if I get time, which we may not do, I'll talk a bit more about expediting the solution. Remember, I told you last time that we would talk about the 95% rule and a few more things, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Now, I will put this comments slide up for a few minutes, and then we'll switch the camera. Well, I guess the camera's already switched to me, so, okay, switch it back to me, and thank you. All right, now we'll talk, I will mainly go over the comments. I think you'll see in the background a picture of my daughter, and if that's, a lot of people have said to me over the weeks, your daughter's into helping you with the cameras, why don't you put her on camera and let us see what she looks like? So what I did was I got out this wonderful picture that my wife and I are very proud of, which is when my daughter was working during her junior year in high school. This was like 1995 and 6. She went and she volunteered for a program which is pretty well known in America called Operation Smile. And what happens there is a bunch of plastic surgeons from all over America go out to Nakuru, Africa, for a few weeks in the summer, and they operate on children that have cleft lips and cleft palates. They're not quite as advanced over there as we are in America. I think nowadays we get to them at a very early age, almost when they're born, I think. But these doctors volunteer their time, and people like my daughter volunteer their time, and they go out there. So she went down to the Virginia area and took a course on what to do, and then she went out for a few weeks to Africa. And this is a picture of her in Africa. And what her job was when the people, young children, came for their operation, she put them at ease before the operation with their mothers and fathers and got them to relax. And then when they came out of the operation, she was the first one to meet them when they came out of the operation and they woke up from their whatever what do they call it out there? Anesthesia. And then she was the first one they saw, and of course she was very, very pleasant with them and did a very good job. So they still do that. And what happens is when if they see a case that's really bad, then they'll bring them to America and get them over here, and they'll operate on them over here where perhaps we might have some better facilities. So she learned a lot for a high school kid, and she got a lot of shots to go out there. And I thought I'd show that picture. But now I will leave it up for a while I go through the comments, and then I'm going to put up another picture which was done this weekend by my 4-year-old grandson, and that'll be up in the background after when we change the pictures. Okay, comments. The second new businessmen selectmen meeting occurred November 19th, 2007. It was the first regular meeting. There was one prior meeting on the 8th of November where they made the decisions about the bond issue, but this was their first regular meeting. The meetings to date have been very businesslike and constructive. And I thank everybody for that, because it sure is a pleasure. And when I get feedback around the town from those meetings, it's very positive. The first one wasn't on TV, but the second one was, and a lot of people are watching these meetings, and they're very thankful for the businesslike way in which everybody, all 7 people, conducted themselves. Tonight I will include an analysis of the content of these meetings, policy versus non-policy ratio, in an attempt to try to make them even better than it was. It was a very good meeting. They were dealing with an older agenda, and I'm hoping that over time they will change the agenda, and I'm going to make some suggestions on that this evening. I will also present the way in which I think the meetings can be improved even further. I will also introduce, as I said earlier, a new cumulative business-like conduct status board. That'll be very quick, and I'll try to show that at every meeting so that you can see exactly what the conducts are like. I will clarify a few financial points that were discussed at the meeting. The debt carryover to 2008 and 2009, and the mill rate after revaluation. Those were comments made at the meeting, and I just want to try to clarify some of those to the best of my ability, and we'll try to do that today. So now I will talk about the financial update for this time. And the first thing I want to point out is that the Bond Restructure School Building Commission was canceled and a new school building committee appointed. 5 people were appointed with a whole bunch of experts to help them with non-voting power, but people from the town, the superintendent of schools and the finance director and a lot of knowledgeable people were assigned to help these new 5 members of this committee. Last time I told you I would find out the date that the state had imposed upon us for solving these problems at the Pearson School. I'm not going to go through those again tonight because I have done that in the past, but that's April 2009 as I understand the situation. Now, I'll just give you Brian's view on this. I think that we shouldn't panic or lose our head on this, not that anybody will, but if we put together a good, viable plan and we know it's a solid, but it doesn't quite meet the April 2009. I think if we go to the state and we explain that to them and we set up some progress meetings with them and show them where our intentions are and what our progress is, they probably would be understanding if we weren't going to make the April 2009 date. But that's just Brian's view. May not be accurate, but I would like to say that, because whenever I worked with governments and states and cities and things, they were always very cooperative as long as they understood that the a good positive approach was being taken, and they were kept up to date on status. Information always helps in these situations. Now, the revaluation is expected early December, and as I kept mentioning, what you will get there is the assessed value of your property and numbers to call if you want to ask any questions or appeal. Now, don't expect to know exactly what taxes you're going to be paying, because that won't come for a while, and I'm going to talk about that a little later in the program. So I also want to talk now a bit about preliminary budget information for 208, 209, because there was discussed at the Selectmen meeting, and I just want to try to clarify a few issues. I did talk to the finance director. Any mistakes in the numbers here or any misinterpretations are mine, not his, because he's a busy man. He's got auditors in there the last few weeks, and he's got a lot of work to do. So I just do the best I can to get enough information to be able to pass on. The additional debt carry forward to 208, 209, as things now stand, may be as much as $118,631, give or take a little bit. It's a rough ballpark number. And we also will have, as I said on my previous programs, we will have some addition because of the 2006 bond. Last year there was about $150,000 in the budget for the bond. This year it's going up to $570,000 or so, and that's a difference of about $444,360 rough idea, not exact, but right in that ballpark, for a total of $562,991. So if you take that information and you go back to the same theory that I was talking about in my earlier programs, our debt carry forward, all things being equal, and they won't be equal, but I just want to say if they were equal, would be about $562,991, plus or minus a percent or so. And if we still think the town expenses will be about 1 mil or 2.92%, that's $588,080 for that, which will add up to $1,131,071. And that turns out to be 1.92 mils if you use $588,080 for a mil. Of course, in the new budget, it'll be a different mill rate, but for right now, I'm just using the one we have, and we'll have that for quite a while yet, and until the new budget's done. So 192 mils or 5.62%. Now, that doesn't mean that the taxes go up 5.62%. That just means that this is the kind of money that we're going to be looking at, plus or minus. If we cut the budget or find some money, a way to reduce the budget for next year from this year's, then we'll save some money there, and the number will go down. Or, pardon me, if we end up with a surplus this year, which is unlikely, but if we do, that might help. And if we wanted to take some money from the fund balance, which we may or may not want to do, that might help to reduce it. So things can be done and will be done along the way. So this isn't nowhere near a final number, but it's just to try to clear up some of the confusion that was at the meeting last week. And I think Henry Centrella, the finance director, will be at the next select meeting, and he might even clarify this even more. I personally think that what I heard at the last selectman meeting, that we are running, and you'll see that in my slides here, that we are running a little over on our budget this year. Doesn't mean it won't be brought into shape by the end of the year. And we have put a hiring freeze on, and we are considering, we put a spending freeze on, and we're considering a hiring freeze. So it's probably time that we started thinking, the new selectmen started thinking about considering a zero-based budget for 208 and 209 and get started on it as soon as possible. The zero-based budget doesn't mean that we'll end up with a zero tax increase. All zero-based budget means is that every dollar is reviewed throughout the whole town budget and justified again. And once it's done, it might not change the budget at all. It might still be the same. But at least the exercise will be gone through and everybody will feel comfortable. Because the new selectmen, it's hard for them to feel comfortable unless they really do understand it. Very important. Now I'm going to put up the notices that I want to go over. And if we can switch to the notices, thank you. I'll find out where I put it here. December revaluation results may be appealed. Now, I said that last time, and I want you to see the contact information when you get your notice in December. There'll be some information in there. As I said last week, you can check with that. And then you can contact that number, those people, and you can ask them questions, and you get a copy of your vision appraisal sheet, and you can check all details for accuracy, make sure you're not billed for 2 lots instead of 1, and make sure you're not billed for an attic apartment that you don't have, things like that. And there will be some mistakes, not many. Most of the stuff will be accurate, but there will be some. We're human beings and we do make mistakes. Then you point out all the inaccuracies out to the contact noted on your notice, and if not satisfied with the results, you can report the errors to the Town Assessment Appeals Board immediately, and if not resolved satisfactorily, you can take legal action. Again, I'm not recommending you take legal action, but if you feel it important to keep your taxes under control, then you can do that. And note, if the appeal process is not followed, legal action may not be possible, and you need to contact the town about that. I'm not the expert on it, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And once again, if you want to get any information from Vision Appraisal, it's www.visionappraisal.com, and you can get on there, and you got all kinds of questions and answers and things like that. And okay, now, last selectman meeting, they did talk about the new mill rate, so I talked to the financial director today, and I've got a little bit of an update here that might help you understand a little better what's going to happen here over the next month or two. The first thing that will happen is the assessments will be mailed out in December, early December. You will get your assessments. You'll have a chance over the rest of that month probably. Got a little misspelling here, but you'll have a chance to appeal the process until, say, January or the end of January, or until the assessments are agreed. I mean, if 1,000 people appeal, it'll take them a little while to square them away. So as soon as they're done, then we will know what the assessments are. So let's say that's the end of January, plus or minus. I don't know when it'll be, but it'll be in that time frame. At this point, if requested by the financial director, he can produce a very rough idea, and it's not really recommended that we ask him to do this, but if we do, he can produce a very rough idea of what the mill rate might be, and but this will be kind of meaningless at that point, and could be very misleading and cause confusion, but it can be done. The next step is, around March 15th by charter, the town manager submits his first budget for the 2008-2009 year. At that point, the first meaningful but not final mill rate calculation will be done by the financial director. And that'll be a rough working, so they have a rough idea of what the taxes will be. And you have to do that to put a complete budget together. But as I've been telling you over the months, over the weeks, with all my formulas and all, the final mill rate calculation is when the budget passes referendum in mid-08. And the reason for that is a lot of information is necessary before we can come up with this final absolute mill rate. And that's like, how much money are we getting from the state? How much money are we not getting from the state? Are we over on the budget or under on the budget? How much will we take out of the fund balance? All that kind of stuff. So this needs to be all done. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that in January we're going to get a very meaningful idea of what the new mill rate is. That's going to be a very iffy situation. Basically, the mill rate, as I'm told, is not just an easy situation that when the mill rate, when the average assessed amount goes up, that the mill rate will compensate. That from what I'm told, that doesn't quite happen that way, and that the mill rate goes down a certain amount by a certain calculation that's done, and then if there's any budget changes, it'll go back up to a certain amount, and all that information won't really be known until we get to this point here, although we'll have a rough idea, and it's a bit like dynamite. If you get a rough idea in January, then you must handle it with very extreme care. We don't want to mislead anybody into thinking they're going to have a certain tax and then find out a few months later that it's more than they expected because they got too premature amount of information. So that's that. Now, having said that, we'll now put up the major status. That hasn't changed at all since the last selectmen meeting. We can switch to that. Thank you. That stayed exactly the same. We haven't improved on that. I'm hoping we improve in the next few meetings, but we haven't. But now where we have made a big change is on the important decisions. That's really interesting. And what I want to say here is that I'm really proud of these guys with the agenda they had for getting as many of these things in the red as possible. So now, yeah, what happened is they stopped the proposed bond package we knew from the prior meeting, and they stopped the proposed bond referendum. But this time, the last select meeting, they disbanded the existing school building committee, and they established a new building committee. They implemented spending freeze. They made an appointment to the Inland Wetlands Commission to replace Gene Berlinski, who is now a selectman. Was on there for 6 years and did an excellent, very professional job. Always conducted himself well. And they put out I put it in blue here, but they asked for bids for the town attorney position. And that'll be due, I think, around December 15th is when they expect to get those bids out. Takes a while to prepare them and everything, if I understand it correctly. They agreed with this dispatchers union contract was announced during that meeting. And that's red, so we added 5 red on there and 1 blue, and then we added a whole bunch of blues here, which are all things that are in blue means in progress but not finalized. So we agreed to submit an application for the Pearson photovoltaic evaluation. There was a presentation done there by Mike Renzullo that was very good, and everybody agreed unanimously, I think, to have the town manager go off to the state and see if we could get a preliminary study done on that. That's good. They asked for bids on the Norcross Road property. I'm not going to go in detail into these, but they asked for the Cary Avenue lots were referred to P&Z for review. They reviewed content of the proposed bond and proposed restructuring, and they talked a bit about how they wanted to try to fund that and things like that. And resolve the Pearson ADA and OSHA infraction. They're on their way now with that, which, as we said earlier, needs to be done pretty quickly. And then resolve the recreation director as soon as practical. They didn't talk about that at the select meeting, as they didn't the rest of these, so they don't have a blue or a red on them. These are things that I had to kind of wait till the budget settles down a bit. And of course, the important one, transfer to school building maintenance responsibility and budget to the town. That'll take time as they have issues to work out there and all. I don't know whether that started or not, but as far as the last meeting is concerned, there was no comment on that. Now, while, thank you. If you can switch to this slide, I think this is kind of an interesting slide. If you can switch, thank you. I'm going to keep a track on this every meeting. It seems like kind of kindergarten stuff, but because of the last couple of year conduct, I've made a new chart called Selectmen Meetings Businesslike. And so far, we've had 2 meetings, and both of them has been very businesslike. I don't think we could ask for any improvement over the last 2 meetings as far as businesslike conduct is concerned. And the non is 0. We'll see what happens as that adds up over the year. It'll be an interesting statistic to look at so that you can all feel it. All right, with that, I am now going to talk about, we'll just leave it on the slides. I can talk about my suggestion for improving the selectmen meeting agenda. And these are strictly Brian's view from my experience, and what I would do if I were in charge. And of course, I'm not in charge, so people will do what they think best. And the first thing I would like to see is, of course, salute to the flag. We'll keep that. The award presentations, should have put a space there, sorry. Public comment. I would try to keep the public comment down if you subtract the public comment from the last meeting, the time frame, not the thing itself, because I think you need the public comment, but if you subtract that and the presentation that was made on photovoltaic, the meeting was about an hour long. So I think that's pretty good. But I would say maybe if we could keep the public comment down and have people submit papers, who get up for 3 minutes, introduce their paper, and submit it to the people, that would probably be a better use of the time. We could get through the meeting a little quicker, and people could read the paper and contemplate it, and then come back at a later date with comments. That would help there to reduce that time. Approved minutes, got to do that. Town manager's report. I would make that the first issue after approving the minutes, and I do have some ideas here for improving the town manager's report. I'm not saying, you know, that town manager isn't doing a good job or anything like that. All I'm saying is I think there's ways we can improve that use of that meeting and the issues that are talked about there, and they'll be coupled with some other slides I have here. I took and I divided I analyzed the meeting and I put things into policy and non-policy groups, and I'll go through that with you today. And then after the town manager's report, we will have the selectmen deal mainly what they should be dealing with, policy issues, and some real high-level policy issues, and clear up all the policy problems and make sure that everybody knows what the policy is, because if you don't have the sheet music, you can't play the music unless you'll play by ear, and most orchestras don't do that. So we need to get these things well known, and the policies don't have to be big, thick manuals and books, although they are in certain cases, like planning and zoning and things like that, but they can be just, you know, one-pagers or even one paragraph in some cases. So, and I put them here, and this is not necessarily in priority order, and it's not necessarily complete. That's why I put this little et cetera down the bottom. But basically, we need to get the high-level objectives known, those 5 or 6 high-level objectives we want to have for the town, if we want to have them. We want to get the financial objectives for the next 5 years on the table and let everybody know what those are and start working on them. That's remember now, the charter calls out for capital 5-year plan, but it doesn't call out for a total financial plan, and that's one of the suggestions I made, that we change the charter to include that, so that the town manager is responsible for a 5-year financial plan, which includes, of course, next year, the first year, second year, third year, fourth and fifth years. And then, what are the town building policies? What policies do we have for the town building? How are people going to follow the policies if they're not clear on what they are? Now, maybe we'll find we have all these policies, just a matter of getting them out and ratifying them and making them available to everybody. Normally when I go to the town and ask for things, they refer me to state statutes and the charter and all kinds of things like that. But I think we got to get them out in a very simple way that anybody who wants to read them can read them and understand them, and not have to search through the internet and state statutes and be a lawyer to be able to understand them. Town growth policies, that's the revenue, and how do we intend to grow the town, and what's the balance of this growth? Remember, we talked about sizing in a previous program. We already have a lot of that in our planning and zoning policies. We just need to make sure that the new selectmen agree with all that and want to go in the same direction and have the same policies. And if not, we got to get them out in the open and get them changed. The charter changes, we need to start discussing that and decide whether we're going to do that or not, and if so, what's our plan to do it? Education policies, what are our policies on education, and what do we want to see as a town? Now, I'm not talking about just the superintendent and the Board of Education. They have a lot of ideas too, but we, the town, also have to be, you know, it's our money, as long as the states, and we need to follow laws, of course, and we need to include everything, but we need, and that's one of the reasons I want to try to collect a lot of these statistics over the next few months that I mentioned on earlier programs. And then we would have the adjournment. And if all this takes more than an hour, or an hour and 15 minutes, then we get, you know, it really shouldn't take that long. And I think that once we get that meeting down to a manageable, and we talk about the essential things, and we do a lot of the other work. For example, I wouldn't have too many presentations in the meeting. I would have people send in a one-page synopsis of their plan, and maybe even the plan, pass it around, let everybody read it, and then just have somebody in for a question and answer session or something like that. So I think the last presentation, photovoltaic one, was very good. It was very short, got to the point. Whether we need one every meeting or not is another story. I think once we get the the application filled out and into the state, that'll give us some time to have these plans circulated to the selectmen, and they can read them and then ask questions if they need to. And we won't take up a lot of time in the meetings with presentations. So that's kind of my idea there, and I think that if we can get the public comment section down to a manageable thing without stifling people, let them put in papers if they really have a lot to say, and then we can get back to them outside the meeting, and keep presentations to a minimum. Have people pass out position papers. And I think when you see what I have to say in the rest of the program, a lot of this shouldn't go past the town manager anyway. I mean, he should be responsible for most of this stuff. And then after he's done all his work, it should be a minimal thing for the selectmen to approve or not approve or ask some questions of. And they shouldn't need a big presentation to be able to do that if they're given the information in advance. So now I will put up the selected town manager's report format. I've always been very frustrated by this. I think most people agree with the new seating arrangement. Everybody I talked to has been very happy having Sheila Sedlak right up in front, and the town manager right up in front next to the mayor. That's been a big improvement. People like that, and I'm glad to see it. The suggested town manager's format is that I think the first thing they should do, the town manager, is give the budget status and say, here's where we stand on this year's budget, and here's the decisions we, the town managers, including the town manager and all his direct reports, here's the decisions that we have taken to stay within the budget policy, whatever the budget policy is. I'll assume now the budget policy is to make the budget, right? Provide no big surprises, right? And if there's big surprises, you have the fund balance to help you with that. But we've talked about that in previous meetings. So I would say the budget is the most important thing. That should be at the top of his report, and it should be basically we're on budget or we're off budget, and here's what we've done to stay on budget. And because it's the town manager's responsibility to carry that out. And kind of decisions like we're going to have a hiring freeze, I don't think those are policy decisions. I think that's kind of the town manager's decision to make those, and that he should be empowered to do so if he isn't right now. I think he is by the charter, but he should be empowered to do that, and then he and his managers should run the town and manage it. That's what I called in my expediting a solution, empowering people and delegating and all those kind of things. So number two, he should say, here's our progress towards preparing the 5-year financial objectives, or at least the financial objectives for next year. I prefer to see it be done over the 5 years, but anything's better than, I think in the past meetings over the last years, we haven't talked enough about growth, and we haven't had 10 minutes set aside in each meeting to talk about that. And I think we do need to do that. And when and the policy issues should be dealt with by the selectmen, and the non-policy issues by the town manager and his management team. So the third is progress towards preparing the 5-year financial plan. Once you have the objectives, as we said in previous shows, you've got to have a plan to achieve it. And that's not only revenue, not only expense, but the both together. And how are we going to do it? And then we need progress report towards achieving the 5-year revenue objectives. And then we need request policy clarification. If the town manager needs any policy clarification, then of course he should do most of this outside the meeting, but if he has to in the meeting, then he would bring up, I need to have a little clarification on a certain policy so I can get on with my job and do it in a practical way. And then I really don't think that people should be going into the selectmen with non-policy issues like Highland Lake property sales and things like that. Eventually, of course, it is the selectman's decision, as I'm told, according to the charter. But all the preparation for that decision, like sending it to the planning and zoning, like we did at the last selectman meeting, and so that should be done. Town manager should do all that, have it all ready, so that he can come to this meeting and say, okay, I've done all the homework, and then I either recommend that you selectmen sell the property or not sell the property, or I request a decision from you based upon the information I've passed out to you before the meeting in the little packet that goes out to all the selectmen. So they should be able to have all the information, read it before the meeting, and make the decision at the meeting. And we shouldn't really have to have presentations by property owners and all that kind of stuff. That should be done at the town manager level. And it could be appealed, of course, at the selectman level if it needs to be. But I would say that 95% of the time, if the policies are spelled out correctly by the selectmen, you won't have to appeal it. You won't need to do that. So now I'm going to, so that whole section there is basically, you know, lake properties, other properties around town, and that all should be done down within the system, and then a recommendation made to the selectmen once all the homework was done. Now I'm just going to quickly put up the old policy definition because I'm going to talk a bit about policy. We had this up last week, and we said policy is a definite course of action adopted for the sake of expediency, facility, etc. And we, as the dictionary says, an example of that's use is we have a new company policy. In our case, a new town policy. And it's also a course of action pursued by a government, which we are, ruler, political party, etc. For example, our nation's or town's policy. And it's synonymous with strategy, principle, and rule. So that's very important. It's very important that the selectmen get as many of those policies out in the open as quickly as possible. Last week I talked about expediting solution, do as many in parallel as possible so that everybody knows what their marching orders are. Otherwise, it'd be tough to march, and I won't have to play John Brown's Body anymore. So that's the definition of it. Now, let's just review the last couple meetings. The first meeting was excellent. All 4 issues were policy issues. And they were done on November 8th, and I won't go through each one of them, but there were 4. They were all 5-1, 5-4, 1 against, and 1 abstention, right? New selectman, because he wasn't involved in the past and wasn't quite up to date on it all, abstained. So that's what happened in the first meeting. The second meeting was also very, very good, in that a lot of the issues they dealt with were policy issues. In the wetland appointment, they have to do that. The ethics appointment was tabled 5-2, and that'll come up at a later meeting. The dissolve the school building committee, definitely policy. Appoint new school building committee, that was done unanimously, that's definitely policy. Solicit bids for the town attorney, I guess that's policy. I don't know whether that could be handled by the town manager, that decision. I think it has to be policy, but I'm not quite sure about that. Anyway, it was done, and I'm going to call it now policy unless somebody corrects me and tells me I'm wrong. If it has to be done by charter by the selectmen, then it's a policy thing. Cary Avenue, P&Z, was sent to P&Z. I don't really think that's policy. I'm going to show you that on the next slide, but that was done, and it's 6-1 vote. I'm happy that it was sent to P&Z, but I think it could have been done just by the town manager, or probably should have been, but again, correct me somebody if I'm wrong. The next one is Norcross Road. That was reviewed unanimously. Photovoltaic was, that's definitely policy, and to start it off. And then the spending freeze, I think that should be a town manager responsibility myself, unless the charter says something different. And by the way, the spending freeze is minor. There's no spending freeze on contractual commitments. They did not do that, and quite rightly, probably. Okay, the next one is non-policy. The second meeting has some what I think might have been non-policy, and I'm always open to correction on these things because I'm not an expert on the charter and all this stuff, but I do know that if I were running the meeting, I would question the spending freeze. Let's let the town manager do that. He's managing the budget. If he thinks he needs a spending freeze, he should put it on. And if he thinks he needs to have a hiring freeze, he should do it and then report it. I did it, that kind of thing. The next is the Unedited Furniture Building. I really don't think that's a policy issue. I do think there's a policy issue there. I think that we really should review our policy on how we treat all these people that are trying to upgrade these buildings in town, and make sure that we have a positive policy for helping them. I'm going to talk about that a bit on the next slide, but I think that is mainly a town manager. The non-policy part, blight issues and this kind of stuff, is mainly a town manager issue. The policy is at a much higher level. Can we, the town, help to get them some, to give them some help in one form or another? And what is our policy towards all this? Very clear in one paragraph so everybody knows what it is. And maybe we can help them to get grants. Maybe we can work the political chains up through the state. Maybe we can help one way or another. I don't know. Now, I'm not trying to say we haven't helped in the past. I'm pretty sure we have helped, and I'm sure we'll have helped some more. But to have a big discussion about this in the selectmen meeting probably isn't the best use of their time when they should be talking about the policy issues. The next one is the Tort Museum. Same thing there. I do know a lot about the Tort Museum. I don't know as much about Winston Furniture. I have heard some things about that, and that you know, they've probably fallen on a little hard time here recently, and they need some help. But as far as the Tort Museum is concerned, I have talked to Charlene, and I did watch the very excellent program done by Barbara Wilkes with Charlene for an hour on Channel 13, which I advise everybody to get a copy of and look at from Barbara, about the whole issue with the Tort Museum. And what happened at the Tort Museum is they have run into a particular problem when they were moving ahead. I did sit in a lot of the meetings in inland wetlands and planning and zoning where they were being discussed, and I do know a bit about that project. And it is, they're moving ahead, and then they ran into an issue, an environmental issue with the two walls near the river, and they have to do some work there that wasn't planned and wasn't intended. When they were doing the other environmental work that was funded, they ran into this problem. So they're out trying to raise money now, and have been for many months, pardon me, trying to raise money so they can carry on with this environmental work and get on with the job. So I hope when I do my one-a-month programs that I can have Charlene come on and just talk about it every X months, every 6 months or so, and let everybody know what the status is on that. And the same with Windsor Furniture. If the lady's willing to come and talk about it for an hour or so and give updates and things, then I'm willing to do that. If she's not, I can understand her desire for privacy, and same with Charlene, and that's okay with me. But I would like to try to get the positive news out to people as much as possible. Now, as far as Cary Avenue lots, again, I think that's a non-policy issue. Alpha Avenue, Highland Lake, Ferrarati, I don't totally know, that's some roads up there. Those, I think, are all non-policy issues that shouldn't be discussed in this meeting until the town manager and his team and the commissions all do their work. And then when they need a decision, if they do, they go to the high meeting. So that's kind of my review on that. And in no way take this as a slam on anything. I think they did a wonderful job there for the first time, and with the agenda that was already set. And I think these comments are meant just to try to help speed up going in a little different direction. And I hope it works out well for everybody. And if they don't want to take my input, that's okay with me. If they take 2 of the points or 3 of the points, then we're going in what I consider the right direction. Now I'm going to put up what I call the hospitable policy slide. And that is that we, the town, and I've mentioned this many times, but I want to bring it up here because of this last selectmen meeting, that we should have a hospitable policy. Create a hospitable, welcoming, warm environment for new businesses, museums, tourist attractions, old building renovators, etc. Now, this doesn't mean that we haven't been doing this in the past, and it's not to disparage anybody in the town, but I think the new selectmen should make it very clear what their policy is, and then we should put a plan together to try to enforce that policy. And if it's any different than what we're doing now, and I think there's plenty of things that can be done that haven't been done before, as I talk to people around the town, and I've mentioned this on previous programs, but I think we want to become very hospitable. And when you do things like we brought this thing up at the select meeting the other night, well, then it gets in a newspaper, and you got a picture in the Torrington Register of a big old building and how Windsor's not progressing. Well, I think we want to try to avoid that as much as we can, and try to put the positive image forward as much as we can at the selectmen meetings. And because, as you know, people will follow the selectmen's example. And if they're positive and they're businesslike and they do the right thing and create the right image, other people will do that too. We need to foster a partnership atmosphere with interested parties wherever practical, that we have as much to gain as they do from getting these buildings squared away. We have more to gain probably than they do in the long run. And then blight enforcement is the last resort, and I'm not saying it's a first resort now, it probably is the last resort now, but it should remain such, and it should be done at the lower levels within the town and not at the selectmen meetings. And it should be done in conjunction with this kind of an approach. And then we should try to keep our internal affairs out of the newspapers, and whenever possible, unless it's positive news. This is part of our number one above. So that's part of creating this good, hospitable environment. Now, I'm not saying we should stop freedom of the press. I'm just saying we shouldn't aid and abet it. And if I were the selectman, I would appoint a press interface that handled all questions from the press. And then we would give the Winston view, not an individual view, on any of these questions. Okay, we have now 15 minutes that we can talk about expediting the solution. Most of the things I talked about tonight were expediting the solution, so I didn't have much time to talk about the other things. But last week we got as far as decision making, and we covered decision making. And this week, I'm going to, and next week, and the following week, and whatever other weeks that I don't have a lot to talk about the select meeting, we will talk about some of these issues that are left. And there'll be more added as we go along. But the 95% rule, results orientation, teamwork, incentives, use of incentives, committees, use of and non-use of, management by objectives, exception, planning for success, positive thinking, system thinking, and lateral thinking. Now, as you see, these programs I've been putting on, I've been using all these techniques all the way along. So some of the techniques I haven't even really defined yet are the ones I've been using for these objectives for the 5-year plan and things like that. And I've tried to use system thinking. One example of system thinking is changing the charter to help you get a business-like environment. That's system thinking. A lot of people wouldn't think of changing the charter. Some would, some wouldn't. But, you know, the first thing you have to look at is the rules of the game. And if the rules of the game aren't right, then you have to change the rules of the game, or you have to live within the rules of the game. So, and most things, rules of the games are like evolutionary documents. They're not the same rules that were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago in almost anything. So they're evolutionary, and they do need to be reviewed, and they need to be kept up to date with the sign of the time. So today I'll just talk a bit about, I don't have a slide for it, but I'll talk a bit about planning for the 95% rule. And you can now have them switch the camera over for the rest of the show. If he's there. Is he there? Okay, well, I'll talk about it until he comes. The 95% rule I've mentioned many times, and it's really one of the greatest things you need to do to speed up and to run a company, or if we can switch the camera there. Well, he doesn't hear me. Thanks. You need to use the 95% rule. And boy, is there a lot of confusion about the 95% rule. And I want to talk about one example tonight. Then first I'll talk about the 95% rule. But the 95% rule is basically when we have a company or a team or a town or anything, we need to be able to delegate to our management 95% of the time. And in order to do that, to get on with decisions, we talked a bit about that tonight, what the selectman should be doing, what the town manager and his team should be doing, and how we delegate 95% of the stuff down to them, the 95 that's not policy. And as we get all the policy worked out, then we should have pretty smooth selectmen meetings. But we have to have the rules for them to work by. We need the policies, and we need to be able to delegate that stuff down. And then in turn, the town manager needs to be able to delegate things down so he can work with his team and stay within these policies and work out the non-policy plans, objectives, and all that kind of stuff. So we aren't too good here at that in Winston, and we need to improve a lot. And I think there are areas where we can. Now, I want to use one example from the town, because part of this program is to use the town as examples wherever practical. There are some meetings that have 5 people on there as committee members and commission members, and they're very professional, and they do sort of work within this kind of a framework and philosophy, and their meetings are very professional, and they deal with the issues they should be dealing with, and they get on with things. But one of the ones that isn't that way, and I've been trying to encourage people there, that we have an Inland Wetland Committee, which I think is an excellent committee and does a lot of good work. I've been to a lot of their meetings, and they did have a change in committee chairman a year or two ago, which I think really improved the situation tremendously from a professionalism viewpoint, and I think made things a lot better. But right now it's a pretty big commission. I can't tell, I don't really know. I think there's 8 or 9 people on it, and the meetings last almost forever, especially when we have big issues to talk about. And part of the reason that I've mentioned to the chairperson a few times is that they don't really follow the 95% rule. They don't delegate enough, in my opinion. Maybe in their opinion they do, but they're the ones that have to sit there till 12, 1, 2 in the morning, at least 11 when they have their meetings, which I think makes it harder for them to get good commissioners too, although the commissioners they have now are not knocking it. I'm just saying that in order, if the shorter your meetings, the easier it is to get people to come. And I think even at the Inland Wetland meetings, after 10 o'clock, people are asleep on their feet, and they can't really make intelligent decisions. It's very hard, and some of them just opt out around 10 o'clock and say, that's it for me for tonight. But I think what has to happen is they have to come up with a set of rules, and they have to delegate it to the inland wetland person we have in town, and let him do 95% of the decision making around, and then bring to them the 5%, and come back to the meeting and say, here's the decisions I made this week that are within your policy, and the policy's got to be clear, and it's got to be stated, and then all the people in town got to know what the policy is. Now, I was on a commission here for the inland wetlands, and we tried to do exactly that, is define things so that this inland wetlands director could carry out things, and people in town would know what they could do and could not do. This was a lake-related thing I was on. But all of the what I would call guidelines that he needed to be able to do his job were nixed by the town lawyer, and the commission. And most of the people on the committee agreed with the guidelines and wanted to do it, but for one reason or another, we couldn't get them approved. So I think that that if we could do that, then that commission would run a lot smoother. It would have shorter meetings, and it would give more power, empowerment, and more direction to all the people who use the committee, and then it would make it a lot easier for everybody, including the citizens, taxpayers, etc. And that's the best example I can come up with from the town. I'm sure I can come up with other ones if I sit in more meetings. And again, I'm not trying to disparage this committee. They have a hard task. They do a lot of good work, and they're to be commended. But on the other hand, I think they can be improved. And I haven't been very successful at doing this, but I'm going to keep trying, because I think that there's great room for improvement there. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'll see you next Friday. We'll talk more about things, and I'll be able to get in a little more perhaps about expediting the solution, because there won't be a selectmen meeting on Monday. So we'll have a little more time next week to talk about expediting the solution, and hopefully get into some of my loves, which are system thinking, lateral thinking, and positive thinking. I've worked with some of the best in the world, and maybe I can pass some of these tips on to people and help you. With that, I say thank you. making more progress now, yes. Dear, we're making more progress now, yes. Dear, we're making more progress now. Still have a long way to go. They promised to bring us more revenue and quality. Promised to bring us more revenue and quality. Promised to bring us more revenue and quality. Instead is now on its way. Yes, dear, we're making more progress now. Yes, dear, we're making more progress now. Yes, dear, we're making more progress now. Selectmen will help us all out. They promise to bring us more revenue and quality. Promise to bring us more revenue and quality. Promise to bring us more revenue and quality. Winchester's now on its way. We're not that. Controversial subjects to his customers. His customers. Hello everybody, this is Brian O'Haron. This is the 12th program in our series, Planning for Success. It's going to be a lot of information today. I'll try to get through as much of it as I can. And I'm going to start out with, as usual, with the agenda. First we'll go through some comments, then we'll have the financial update, some notices, quite a bit of notices and financial update this week, major progress status board, because we did have a meeting on Monday night of the selectmen, and we will have a whole lot of major decision statuses on the board. Then I'll talk a bit about instrumentation, talk a little bit about the analysis of the meeting, and we're not going to talk about the Pearson School, even though I have it on the agenda, because I don't think I'll have the time, and probably not have too much time to spend on the new expediting and solution stuff, because I'm going to be talking a lot about the expediting the solution throughout the program and giving some examples from the last meeting as much as I can. So first thing I'd like to do is thank Verna Gilson, who's up at the Beardsley and Memorial Library in Winsted. She's in charge of the genealogy and local history room. Does a wonderful job and has been a big help to me. As you see today on the program, we have Charles Darwin again, because I'm going to be talking a lot about Charles Darwin and a lot about various controlling the environment and various things that he was very involved in. So first we will have the comments. The third new businessman-dominated selectmen meeting occurred December 3rd, 2007. It was a second regular meeting. The first new school building committee meeting was held to deal with the OCR issues. That was held on last Wednesday, and I have been reminded by Jay Case that the compliance is with the federal government in Boston, even though the monies are coming from the state. So I'll probably have to emphasize that a little more in the future. The selectmen meetings continue to be businesslike and constructive, and I thank you again for that. I will continue to include an analysis of the content of these meetings, policy versus non-policy ratios. And as intended, I will continue to suggest improvements in an attempt to improve things even further for the foreseeable future. As far as the financial update is concerned, show this every week. Revaluation, as expected, happened this week, and everybody should have their revaluation notices now in the mail. Remember, we don't have the new mill rate and probably won't for a few more months, and on into the beginning of next year, because there still has to be a lot of work done to get through all the revaluation reviews and make sure everybody's happy and gets their decisions made on any questions they have. So that's going to be a while before that happens. I do have another slide later in the program where I will talk a bit more about the revaluation and some events surrounding that. The budget upward pressures, I've changed this to read upward pressures, which is a business term that people use for when they talk about possible monies for the following year. They talk about upward pressures. The debt, 428,765, that's the old debt carry forward, both the school debt and the new bond, 206 bond issue. And then a possible town expense of 588,080, which is 1 mil. It'll be a different mill by then, but I'm using the existing one for now just for purposes. And then at the select meeting, they mentioned the Newfield Road. That's another possible 57,400 that we might need next year. And that'll be about 1,074,245 altogether, which is about 1.83 mils, or 5.33%. So we already have some upward pressure for next year. And then if we have to spend any money on the new school, Pearson school upgrades, then that'll be added to that, and that'll add more upward pressure. They say they're probably going to spend about $1 million one way or another, so our share will probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000. So whether that all has to be paid next year or not, I don't know, but we'll know that in a few months. And then if necessary, we'll put that in the upward pressure chart we have here. And we'll continue to put upward pressures in here as we find out through the meetings what they may or may not be for next year. This year's budget has been forecast as running over, and a spending freeze was put in place by the selectmen 2 meetings ago, and that's still, as far as I know, is still in place. That excludes, as I mentioned before, any contractors' contracts. They're not included in that. Right now, as far as notices are concerned, we did have the revaluation. They were mailed this week, and there was a number on there for you to contact if you have any questions, 1-888-844-430. I'm pretty sure that was the number. It looks like I got one digit missing, but anyway, look on your paper, and you'll see what the number is to call. And you call between December 3rd and December 13th, between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., and you schedule a meeting with Vision Appraisal. The meeting will be held down in the town hall, and you'll be able to talk to them for about 15 minutes an issue. So if you have 2 pieces of property, you get a half an hour. If you have 3 pieces of property, you probably get 45 minutes at maximum, and 1 piece of property about 15 minutes. I did call and schedule for myself, mainly because I want to go through the process and see what it's like, and truly try to understand what happened here during the reval, especially where my property is concerned. I would urge you all. I know they've got a lot of phone calls down there. I don't know how many people have set up appointments, but you're welcome to do that if you want to know more. Now, you can also get on the Vision Appraisal website, which is www.visionappraisal.com, and you can go through a series of steps to see your own evaluation if you have a computer, and you can get on there. And then I will warn you about one thing. I tried to do it, and I found out fast that you have to use the exact same address and name, spelling, and everything as you have on your card, vision appraisal card down in the town hall. Like, for example, West Wakefield Boulevard, I couldn't get it to come up. Kept saying we don't have it in the system, but you have to use the W Wakefield Boulevard instead of West Wakefield Boulevard, which I didn't know. The town hall told me that. East Lake Street would be E Lake Street, West Lake Street, W Lake Street, East Wakefield Boulevard, East E Wakefield, and then for the town, same sort of thing. So if you have any questions or you can't get it, give a call to the assessor's office or the number that's on your card, and they'll help you find your way through the computer system. I was told by the town hall this week when I went down to ask them, the Vision Appraisal TV program that was promised, I mentioned to you once on this show, could not be arranged by the assessor's office. So I don't think they're going to have that TV program where they answer questions and do things like that. So you're just going to have to go down there yourself and talk to them through that number that I told you about, and that's on your Vision Appraisal letter you got from the town. Check them for accuracy and then give a call if you have any questions. Next is the town has received the second report. Remember, we had a report from the insurance company about the schools which said they were safe. We talked about it a few programs back, that the schools are safe. There are some problems that the fire marshal pointed out and other people. They've been around for a few years, and they have been on previous reports as well from the insurance company, so they need to be fixed. But as far as the town building, they checked over, town hall, and whatever other town building they check over, they're also safe. They got the new report. I got a copy of it. You can get one from the town hall, and Mark Douglas has them up there on the second or third floor, and if you need one, or you can get a hold of me on my numbers and I'll get a copy to you. But basically they reiterated the fire marshal's reports for the 3 schools and recommend minimum budget changes for the areas in that area, and then until we do the major school renovations. And so their kind of reports were looking at pre-major renovation stuff, what needs to be done in the short term. A copy of the report is available, and you can get a copy of it. Now, I want to talk a bit now about the hospital policy. I call it the hospitable policy. Not the hospital, but the hospitable. We have access to a grant writer. I'm told that the town does use a grant writer. And remember, the hospitable policy is how can we be hospitable to anybody who wants to come to this town, whether they be developers, museums, art colonies, individuals, businesses. How can we be very, very open and hospitable to these people and inviting to these people and not make it difficult for them with a lot of red tape and a lot of bad karma. So we have access to a grant writer. The grant writer did work on the Newfield Road grant and other grants, and we need to make his efforts or her efforts, whatever the grant writer is, I think it's a he, we need to make the effort visible, very visible to everybody in the town that somebody's working on this stuff, and then we need to get the related progress on anything they're working on out in the open so everybody knows what they're working on and what the progress is, and then if anybody else wants to use a grant writer, then they should check with the town manager or whoever and see if they can make use of these services. And I don't know if they can or can't, but it's a good question to ask. If you're in need of a grant, then you should be checking with the town hall and see if there's any way that they can help you. The other thing I'd like to say, we had a pretty rough week as far as the press was concerned, in my opinion, and it was not actually so much this week as the week before. But I still want to make a plea to everybody in town to try to keep our internal affairs, our political internal affairs between political parties and between departments and things like that. Let's try to keep our internal affairs out of the newspapers if we can. And if somebody's told information in confidence between different political party members or different selectmen or anything like that, they should probably keep it in confidence. And they probably shouldn't be saying anything to the newspapers unless it's an official, one way or another, an official release, or it's talking about public information. If it's talking about public information, that's a different story, but it still should try to be, we're one team here, And we should all be saying good things about each other, and we shouldn't be upsetting the people in the press about this. And I saw several things in the press that were very disturbing over the last few weeks, and it's usually our own officials in town saying things to the press that perhaps be better off saying no comment to. And because it is embarrassing for people, and it's embarrassing for their families when things get in the paper, especially if they're not true or they're speculation. So I want to make my pitch, which I'll probably be making a lot of times, to try to get everybody to say no comment whenever they can, and to try to resolve our own problems in our own family and in our own house. And positive news, of course, is always good. You know, nobody's going to argue about that. Now, what I want to point out on this is that, in general, and I've dealt with the press all over the world in a lot of capacities, some companies won't even let you talk to the press unless you're the press interface. So, and some pretty major companies are that way. But it's best to say no comment. If you're in a position of authority and somebody calls you in the middle of the night or knocks on your door at 10:30 and has a question, it's best to say no comment. And then think about things, talk to your peers, and then make sure we have a united front and we talk positively here. It's all part of this, creating a good environment, a healthy environment, spreading good news so people want to come to this town. And I saw a person today, matter of fact, just before I came in here, stopped me and asked me how things were going and how much value my house went up and all that. And I told him, and he said, well, what have you been doing lately? And I told him I was trying to help the town and do these things. And he said, well, I've been here since 1930, I don't know, I guess it was 54. And he says, it hasn't changed a bit in that time frame. And I just gave him my positive speech that no matter what, we got to look forward and we got to try to be positive and we got to try to make everything work. Otherwise, it won't. So please do not speculate in the press. There will be enough information for the press in public meetings. They can get all the information they want in public meetings. And then if they do want to talk to us, maybe it's best if we get the two parties that are in power now to sit together and talk to the press. That would be nice. Wouldn't that be a difference? So I'd like to see that. I hope you out there, you taxpayers and owners of the town and all other leaders in the town, will encourage our leaders to do that. I would appreciate that. Now we're going to get into the exciting part, which is after the selectmen meeting on Monday, we got a new camera person tonight who's doing a good job. So my daughter's in New York today, so she couldn't help us out. Major status has changed a little bit, not much, but you can notice we've got a little more blue on here than we had last time, because we are starting to delegate authority to the managers and move things from the selectmen meeting to the town manager. And we're going to be doing more of that in the future, I hope. If I know these businessmen, they'll probably do that. And so that's happening a little better. And we did set up at the last selectmen meeting, they set up a review of the charter and make changes where necessary if practical. Now, these changes, once agreed by the Charter Commission and the Board of Selectmen, then they have to go to the public referendum. The charter can't be changed without going to the referendum. So those are the steps. They'll have some open public meetings. The commission will put together the new recommendations for the charter. They'll take it to the selectmen. The selectmen will either agree or they won't agree with it. If they agree with it, then it goes to a referendum and or a public meeting, I guess, and then a referendum. I'm not exactly sure what the process is, but the next time, since I've been put on the committee or asked to be on the committee, I will have more information about that. The first meeting is next week to elect officers and to set up some kind of a schedule and agenda and probably be sworn in. And then we'll know more. I'll know better. I think the second meeting is probably a public meeting, but I'm not positive about that. And my view is, if you have any concerns, you can go down to the town hall. You can get a copy of the charter free from the in the town clerk's office. Read the charter or some portions of the charter, and get your feedback into the town manager or anybody who's going to be on the commission, and try to get that in. And I'm encouraging all the people in town that run the town to let me know what they think they need in the charter to help them run as a business. That'd be my major concern, is how can we get the charter so we can run like a business, like I've mentioned on previous programs. So we've put this down. We got a couple more blue ones in here. These are the harder ones to do, so they're going to take longer. But now I will put up the important decisions ones. Now I can't go through all these because it's really getting long now. These are the original. These are the original ones we had from the first meetings, 11/8/07, and that, and then 11/19/07, and then somewhere along here, we're going to get into what happened on Monday night, and it's number 18 on the list. Here's what happened on Monday night, and on Monday night we went through. Let's turn to 18 on mine because then I won't have to keep twisting my neck here. We went to the Winston Fire Department approval. That was a major decision for the town. I personally think that shouldn't be. The town manager should be able to make that decision, but that's another story. We'll talk about that later in the program if I get that far today. The Winston Fire Department has to come whenever they have a gator parade, which is named after one of the firemen that died a few days or a few weeks before one of the previous parades, and they named it after him. And they have to ask for permission to spend some money to have the fire trucks and spend in the parade. They got that permission, so that happened, and it was done. Boards and commission appointments were made, 3 for reappointments. Three commissions had reappointments, 2 new appointments, and 1 reappointment failed. Then we had the liaison appointments, 5 appointments for the liaisons from between the new selectmen, 7 new selectmen, and 5 new selectmen, and 2 appointed selectmen, and they appointed the mayor appoints these people, and they appointed 5 people to various to interface with their various commissions and committees in town, and there were 2 reappointments there. The selectmen accepted the town manager's resignation. Now, I'd just like to say that when Owen Quinn was here, I dealt a lot with Owen Quinn, and not a great amount, but I've had quite a few meetings with him, exchanging information and had discussions, and I always had. He was always good to me, and we always had fruitful conversations, and I wish him good luck in the future. And I kind of wish some of the things that were in the paper before they should have been weren't there. Would have made it a little easier on he and his family and us. So I'd like to see that not happen anymore. But good luck to you, Owen, and Godspeed. Next, they agreed to town manager's severance package, and that was unanimously agreed. I think. There might have been one person. We'll see on the next slides, set of slides, if everybody agreed that. I think they did. Appoint temporary town manager effective December 4th, 2007. That was Tuesday. That town manager is there. He's working now, and he'll be there sometime between now and February 28th when he's got to get back to another commitment he has. And in the meantime, they're going to be discussing an interim town manager, the approach to how they're going to get an interim town manager. There was quite a bit of discussion about that in the selectmen meeting. Now, I say this, I want to, pardon me, I want to say that the selectmen meeting is on TV, I think 3 times. It's on when it's Monday night when it originally happens, it's on a Wednesday evening, and on Saturday morning. And John can correct me if I have the wrong times there. And then I think if you want a copy of it on tape, that you can buy one from the station, Channel 13 down here, Charter Communications, for about $15, I think. But if you really want one. So there's plenty of opportunity to see this tapes, and I encourage for the next 6 months at least, everybody to have a real good look at this and pay attention, because it's really going to be a boon for our town, I'm pretty sure. So pay attention. And then the next time you vote in 2 years, you'll be very, very well up to date and be able to help these people get reelected where you think they should. Now, the next thing that happened was they talked about allowing the town manager to sign the Still River Greenway. That was another all these so far, with perhaps the exception of the fire station thing, were all policy issues, in which I'm very happy with that. Now, I want to also say, though, that some of these things that I see are non-policy, the selectmen still have to be involved in because of charter. So until the charter is revised, if it is revised, they still have to be involved in some things by charter that I probably wouldn't want to see them involved in because they're not policies. There's a little conflict there between the policy part of the charter and then other things that they have to get involved in which are not policy. So I think that needs to be cleared up. They approved a police department fund transfer that they have to do. That's the other thing I think probably they shouldn't have to do, but maybe that should be delegated to the town manager and not be. It's not really a policy decision. But it is a charter, probably, decision, so that's why that's there. The next is they're making a strong, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that tonight, probably a lot of the program. They're recommending to planning and zoning to readopt the current plan for conservation and development and update in smaller increments over the years. I don't think it actually says it that way in the recommendation, but that's basically what the intention is. And also to consider some recommended changes submitted by the developers people. They're scripted by the attorney, but it's basically Kramer and Anderson, the developers consultants who are trying to help the developer and the town to square away some problems here, which I'll talk about tonight. They convened a 5-person charter revision commission. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated. You can guess who the unaffiliated person is. And then they approved a Winston Road repair grant. And I got some numbers here on that, which are probably, I'm not exact, but they're close. It's the kind of numbers they mentioned in the meeting. It's a $287,000 grant, $229,600 will be given to us, and $57,400 we have to come up with ourselves, and that's why I put in there in the upward pressure on the next year's budget that $57,400. Now, I do have a little note on the bottom of the slide which says, note the results orientation for most items. One of the things I'm going to be talking about in the expediting solution is that you should use always results orientation. Now, if you look at the first words, I'm going to go back on these slides a second, because this is a perfect opportunity for me to point out to you what results orientation means, because I will be talking about it in later programs. But you notice all the first words on here are results orientated. Resolve, transfer. I didn't put one on this one, but this was a resolution as well. Reappoint. Reappoint. Liaison is not really a result word, but it's one of the ones on here that isn't. Appoint, reappoint, accept, agree, appoint, discuss, not really results oriented, allow, approve, recommend, and then convene and approve. These are all results oriented. Do something, get something done, as opposed to talk to or meet with or something like that. So we're going to talk about more of that later, but I thought this would be a very good time to point that out to you, and it's a big help. Okay, now the next thing I want to go on to, first of all, most of these, as I'll show later on a slide if I can get to it, is, and if not this week, I'll show you next week, but mostly policy decisions this time around, and that's very good. So there were a few things talked about that weren't policy, but I didn't put them up on this particular slide. I'll have them on the next slide. There were some other things talked about in the meeting that I didn't think should have been and shouldn't be in the future, but we'll get to that later. Now I'm going to put up the instrumentation slide. Remember I told you about instrumentation, and when you're in critical care, how you have to have all this instrumentation to see what your heartbeat and your pulse rate are, and bells go off if something happens. And we need this instrumentation. So what I'm going to keep putting this up, and I think it's one of the highest policy and one of the highest priorities that we should have in a selectmen meeting. And I've just put it into 3 sections, as I mentioned in previous meetings. The average growth that we've had over the last 10 years, 3.52%. Are we on schedule for that this year or not? Are we ahead or are we behind? The next one is 3.52, which our average over the last 10 years, going to a question mark. And I have put 6% in my sheets. It could be 4%, 5%, 7%, whatever the town decides they want to try to achieve there. And then right now that's unknown and this is unknown. We don't really know. So one of the things I would do if I were a selectman is I'd ask for a weekly report or a monthly report or a biweekly report that told me exactly where we stand against our targets here. And then the next thing is, the only candidates that I know of right now for the Grand Leap are the Highland Ridge Estates and the Winchester Estates, the things we've been talking about all this time. And well, I do think there is one candidate for this middle one, and they haven't come to town yet. I think they've talked to planning and zoning about a possibility on in town for a housing development with children and things like that. So, but I don't know enough about it, so I haven't put anything on there. But sooner or later, if it does pop up and they do apply and they do want to do it, then we'll start including it on the possibility here for some development and some revenue come. Doesn't mean it'll be profitable revenue. If it has a lot of children in it, then it could be break even or even lose for the town for quite a few years. So just because a development is coming to town doesn't mean it's going to help us out with our tax situation and our savings. We might have to spend all the money that comes in from taxes to educate the children, and I don't have anything against that, but I just want to say that's one of the things we have to be a little careful that we get a mix there. So that's that. Now, I'm going to talk more about Highland Ridge Estates and Winchester Estates today because some things are happening there, and some for the good, maybe, hopefully. But the first thing I want to point out, and I hope you can see the red here on my slide, I'll read it to you just in case it doesn't show up here on the camera, but the Prudential Grand Leap, Highland Ridge Development, and the developer is working with the town and the state on plans for the water line to his property up through the corridor there, and he's trying to get that squared away with the town and state. I went to that meeting. It seems to be going in the right direction, and there are some proposals being put together by the town to bring to the state, and then sooner or later I think that'll get resolved. Basically what happens is the state needs some water into their property down on the corridor there, and past that is the development property. They're just trying to work together to make sure they get enough water for both there, and who pays for it and things like that. So they're working together with Public Works, and I think that's going to come out all right in the long run. The next one, though, is a little surprise to me, and I'm not happy with it, and I think you people probably won't be either, but the developer is working the town on sewer plans to get sewer to his property. And one of the problems we have here, which I just realized once the election took place and we started to look closer at this, is that we always thought that the DEP and the Army Corps engineer permits were the next step, and that was moving along, and the Army Corps was reviewing, and the DEP down in Hartford there were reviewing these 2 projects, and it turns out that we, the town, have been on the critical path for quite a while. And the Army Corps, or DP actually, is waiting for a letter from our town which says that everything's okay with the town and that we can run the water and sewer line down the corridor and up to the new developments. Well, it turns out that we're not in a position right now to give them that letter. We may be. I mean, there's some question about the whole thing. The town is on the critical path. I'm going to talk a bit about critical path today, and explain to you what a critical path is for those who don't know. Is on the critical path, and we have to resolve some issues. with this, because we're slowing down the progress, not the DOP and not the Army Corps of Engineers, but us, we the town. So we have been in the past. I think something was done with the selectmen meeting the other night that'll really help this, and we'll talk about that next. But we got to get this letter off to the DEP, and we got to, in order to do that, we have to have a few issues resolved as a town before we can do so. These issues have now been actioned at the selectmen meeting on December 3rd, 2007, and I thank them for that, because I think that that's really going to help us. All right. Now, the next thing is the Winchester Estates. I just checked this morning, and 1 or 2 days ago, their plans have now gone into both the inland wetlands, very small things that need to be looked at by the inland wetlands people that might turn into bigger things, but they're very small, we think, and inconsequential and should be easy to handle. So that application has gone in for Winchester Estates, which is the second development, and the application's also gone into planning and zoning. So they're back with their new application, and that has to be reviewed by planning and zoning and inland wetlands, and then once they get a permit, they don't anticipate that these need much from the Army Corps or the DEP because of the size of the project and the positioning of it and all that. So we don't expect to go through as much. There's no golf course involved in Winchester Estates, so that should help a little. But we do have to get this water and sewer stuff down the corridor. We got to get that resolved. Okay. So before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about it later. But right now, I want to continue with the business-like meetings. Remember, I got the new slide, said selectmen meetings business-like, that are conducted in a business-like manner. Well, 3-0. So far, we've had 3 good, professionally conducted and attended selectmen meetings. It was very good, this last one. There was a little contention towards the end, and contention's okay as long as it's done in a friendly manner, in a business-like manner. Let's call it a business-like manner, not a friendly manner, because maybe it wasn't so friendly, but it was business-like, and there was no, it was done in a pretty respectable way. So 3-0 so far. I'm glad to see it, and again, selectmen, thank you for that. Now I'm just going to repeat quickly the policy definition. I've done this the last 2 or 3 times. It's so important to this town that we have the selectmen deal with the policy and the town manager deal with the non-policy issues. That policy means a definite course of action adopted for the sake of expediency and facility, and it's a course of action pursued by a government ruler, political party, etc. In our case, the town. And it's synonymous with strategy, principle, and rules. So we did have some more issues this time that perhaps weren't at the policy level discussed at the selectmen meeting. I'll go over those in a few minutes. But here's the total so far for all the meetings, the 3 meetings that were, the 2 meetings that were public, and the one that was, the 3 meetings that were public. First one was a short one, 2 days after the election. But as far as policy is concerned, we had 22 altogether that were in the policy area and 10. But our ratio has gone a little better in the last meeting, went from 10 to 4. So it used to be 50%, now it's like a third, that not policy. So we're going in the right direction. We're going from 50% to 30%. Hopefully next time it'll be 15, and sooner or later it'll be 0% non-policy discussed at this meeting. The policy, I broke it down, and I'm going to go through it kind of quickly because we already talked about most of the things, but these were the way it went. Policy, boards and commissions, policy liaison appointments, they were done by the mayor, and policy to accept the town manager's resignation, policy to approve town manager's severance package, policy to appoint a temporary town manager, policy to discuss the interim town manager. Then here's the voting: unanimous, unanimous, 5 to 1 to 1, 2 to 5 to 0. This was an against, the failed one. Unanimous, unanimous, 6-1-0, and unanimous. And if you notice here, in a lot of cases, the businessmen vote kind of the same way. They just happen to be in one political party. And then the other people kind of either vote, sometimes vote with them, Mike Renzullo tends to vote once in a while with the Republicans. They all vote, of course, unanimously together, and all unanimouses are everybody together. And there's quite a few unanimouses here, so I don't want to underplay that. And then there's usually the abstention and the against, usually from the non-businessmen. Now, when I say non-businessmen, I mean people who haven't spent a lot of years running their own companies and that. So I don't mean to say that they don't have some business acumen and they don't have some experience, but I'm talking about the real mature business people. Okay, the next one is policy, approved signing of the Still River. Policy, approved police department fund transfer. Again, I don't think that should be in the end, but it's probably charter policy. Recommendation to P&Z policy. Actually, the mayor is doing the recommending to the P&Z, but that was unanimously voted policy. And then convene the Charter Revision Commission, 5 in favor, 2 against, and approve Newfield Road, unanimous. And tax referral program was tabled. TAB means table. They're still trying to get some information from the town manager before they make a decision on that. So very good on the policy. I think they get a B on that this time around, and we're looking for an A. So consistently, because I think, again, the meeting this time, if you subtract the presentation, the 10-minute presentation made by Mark Renzullo on the photovoltaic stuff, probably about an hour, 15-minute meeting. You know, there's hardly any public comment, very little. And then there was some signing going on of papers. That took about 5 or 10 minutes. So if you boil that down, it's probably, again, about an hour meeting. My own view is someday we're going to have half-an-hour meetings there. Once we get to the policy and we get everybody in full gear and we got a plan and we're moving, then we're going to have very short meetings there, unless for some reason or another we plan to have a long one. But the non-policy, I think, and I put a /charter there because they might have been forced to do it by the charter, and that's something we'll review in the charter when we do the charter review. Winston Fire Department, town manager should be able to handle that. Police Department transfer, normally in a business, the town manager should be able to handle that with the police captain. The Winston Furniture was discussed. I didn't put it on the last slide. And the Tort Museum. And actually what happened there was good, because we had the building inspector come in and say those buildings are pretty sound structurally, and they're not on the blight list, and although one of them is may be on there sooner or later, and they have broken windows they should be fixed, and there are some issues with them. And the selectmen did say they would like the planning and zoning director to go in and talk to these people and see how we could help as a town. And they also said they wanted to make sure that anything that should be on the blight list should be on the blight list and enforcement. So it was very positive in that respect. And that's the way it usually works in selectmen meetings. People make accusations, and then when the right person comes in who knows the facts, it turns out to be the situation isn't as bad as people thought it would be. So I'm very happy with that. It's going to be a little tricky now because I'm going to do a horizontal slide, and I want to see if we have a problem with that. Is there any, how's that look on there, okay? Can you see it? Okay, so I guess it's there as good as it's going to be there. I drew a rough idea of a critical path. This is a plan you see here, and here's the start of the plan, and here's the finish of the plan. And it has all these activities linked together. And all plans have a critical path. Those things are activities that have to be done before you can really move on, and that may delay the whole project if they don't get done in time. Down here I put a rough little idea of what a timeline is. So the critical path would be like through the center here, all these activities, okay? And that in order to, if you delay one of these by a long period of time, it could delay the whole project and cost a lot more money. So that's what I mean by critical path. I'll be talking a lot about critical path in the future, and even today a bit, and I want you to know that. Now I also quickly want to, before I go on, put up my 2 triangles again. The good triangle, which is the way we should work and the way the town is working now. We're going down there. We're doing all tough decisions up in number 1 and 2. And we've made some tough decisions there. First of all, we got all these selectmen in that have business backgrounds. And we started to make decisions to recommend things to planning and zoning and to do this and to do that. And we're starting now to move down on this slope, and we're going to move more and more professionally as we go along, and over 4 or 5 years we'll get there. So I wanted to remind you of that, especially for those who haven't seen the program before. Now I want to talk a bit about net grand list growth, because we have had our revaluation. So I want you to understand it's a very difficult subject for most people to grasp, including myself. It took me a long time. But I want you to understand that the net grand list growth we keep talking about in these programs and all over town. Oops, it fell down. Wind blew it off. Kind of windy out today. I'm going to take all the other ones down, and then maybe this will stay up a little better. The net grand list growth that we talk about is, there are 2 types of net grand list growth, and I want to make it very clear to you that we're more interested in one type than we are the other as we grow our grand list. The first part is the additional taxpayers that help the town prosper and share the burden, and they share the burden of the current taxpayers. So that means getting new taxpayers into town, additional taxpayers. And that's additional developments that are profitable to the town. There are some that won't be, but we got to make sure that there are more that are than aren't, otherwise we won't get anywhere. Additional businesses that are beneficial to the town, that supply jobs and pay taxes on their property and help the economy. And additional individual homes that add to the tax base. Somebody comes to town and builds a new house, and that's all very good. Now, if somebody comes to town and buys an existing house, that's a little different. That more or less falls into number 2, which is the other way you grow the net grand list. The other way is to grow the value of existing taxpayers' property, and that comes through things like permits. When you take out a permit and add to your property, then you'll get taxed on that, whatever you added, and your tax will go up a little bit probably. And additions, if you put an addition on your house, then you're going to pay more tax because the value of your house will go up, it'll be assessed, and it'll go up. So those that kind of growth doesn't help us too much as taxpayers because it basically doesn't add any new taxpayers to the town to help share our burden. So I was going to go a little more into this week, but I think I'll wait a little more till next week to go into this a little further. But number one above can increase our standard of living by getting these new people to come to town, and possibly stabilize taxes for all residents. It won't be perfect, but shouldn't be having to pay a lot more taxes if you have a lot more people to help you pay for the things in town. And then we should also be able to afford to improve our town as well, as I showed you in the past on my sheets. Now, but number 2 above can increase taxes because of reval for some people, not everybody. Remember, the average person on reval won't get an increase in taxes. It's only those where we redistribute the thing, and some people have, many people have already talked, a couple of them. One of them on the selectman said he got a 40% increase. Another one said they had a 100% increase. Depends where the average comes, and we don't know that yet. But those who are on the average won't have to pay any more tax. It'll be distributed, and the mill rate will be dropped. Of course, we don't know that now and won't know for quite a while. So the standard of living can only be raised in that second situation by getting more taxes from the existing taxpayers. So that's what the problem is there. And it's okay if we don't want to increase our standard of living, then it doesn't matter. But if we do, we want to get everything all fixed up, and we want to have new things and better things for the town, then we have to increase our standard of living by getting people to come in and help take the burden from the taxpayer. Now, this week at that selectmen meeting, we had a big breakthrough. We had 13 years ago, we did a current plan for conservation and development. We have it right now, and it was to last 20 years. It's required to be updated every 10 years to conform to state plans. Unfortunately, we haven't done that. And the town is now 3 years behind in doing that. And part of the reason for that was the town was struggling with a massive task to produce a revolutionary change in time and cost, 50,000 to 125,000 estimated in the last minutes from planning and zoning. And that's been the main delay, reason stated for the delay over all these years of changing that conservation and development plan. Now, the mayor and the businessmen on the board of the selectmen, and I can't remember whether any in the minority voted for it, and I don't have much time now to review it, but I'll remind you again next week. But the mayor and the businessmen on the board of selectmen have asked Planning and Zoning Commission to adopt the current plan and consider changes to the plan, updating the plan as in a non-revolutionary way, but more of an evolutionary way. A little bit every time they need something, rather than spending $125,000. Now, I don't know if that's exactly in the recommendation, but that's what they discussed at the meeting. So one way or another, that'll all be we're finally getting some attention put on that. We'll be able to break this bottleneck we have. We'll be able to get that letter out sooner or later after the work's been done by planning and zoning. If they do agree to do it, and they may or may not, then we can get the letter out to the DEP, and we can get going on with the plans for the development. That'll be a big step forward. We can now, changes can be made. I did check with how Torrington does it and other places do it, and you don't have to do a revolutionary approach. You can update the plan a little by little and have it reviewed and be in compliance. So that's the way the selectmen seem, according to the last meeting, that's the way they want to go in the future, and I wholeheartedly agree with that, because evolution has usually been business better than revolution for a lot of reasons, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So changes and clarification of the current plan are needed to ensure that it is clear and the plan is in compliance with that of the state, and that the sewer and water can be installed down the new enterprise zone. And for Highland Ridge Estates and Winchester Estates, which are our Grand Leap candidates. They may never make it, we never get them in, but right now they're the only thing we can see on the horizon that's going to help with the Grand Leap and getting the correct revenue up on the net grand list. So we need that very bad, and this is a great thing that's happening from the last meeting, and I'm very happy with that decision and the way it's going. Now, it'll take time. Planning and zoning still has to review it, and still have to agree to it. And the other thing that the selectmen did is they asked them to accept some help from the developer and Kramer and Anderson, some of their consultants, to help rephrase these things properly and get them included in the resolve the plan for conservation and development, and get it done. And then as over the years, as new things come up and new reasons for changing this plan, we can then, a little piece by piece over the years, change it, or anytime we want, really, at will. We don't have to wait till next year. We could do it 3 times a year or more if we deem it necessary to help grow our town. A recommendation was made there, and they're going to consider these, and we'll watch the progress along the way. The developer has offered to help, and we're very happy with that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that, because basically, we've got more here that I'm going to be able to fit in the next 5 minutes or so I'll just continue with it next week. But basically, there's nothing wrong with people who want to come to our town making suggestions to us on how we can change the plan for conservation and development to help them and make it easier for them and better for us. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. And that's not a conflict of interest for the selectmen. They should be letting everybody make suggestions. Anybody can make suggestions. Doesn't mean they have to accept the suggestions, or planning and zoning has to accept that. Now, the other point I'd like to make is that this developer's he's invested about $10 million in our town. He's a taxpayer, and he's given about $250,000 to the town to hire people, the town of Winchester, to hire people to review his plans and to check over his plans and to make sure they're happy. As a town, we're happy with them. So That's already been done, and nobody ever said anything about conflict of interest when that was being done. So now he's just offering to help. The people can refuse his help if they want to in planning and zoning, but it's a pittance compared to what he's already spent, and it's in no way going to influence the policy, because they make the policy, not the developer. So I want to point that out very strongly, that we need to encourage that kind of an attitude, and we need to work. I have Mr. Darwin with me today. I hope he's up there. Is Mr. Darwin up there? Back of me? You have to look on the TV. No, you can't see it, I guess. Yeah, okay, he's there. And I've got him with me today because we have to work as a town with natural selection. And we have to have input from potential developers, businesses, organizations, future inhabitants, in order to evolve our policies and procedures in a manner that suits theirs and other needs. That's part of what I call the hospitality policy that I have mentioned before. This is not a conflict of interest, but a good business practice. All good businesses want to look after their customer. My granddad used to say, the customer is always right in any business. And if somebody come into the barbershop that he hated, he would give them a haircut and take their money and pay his food bill with it. So, and be courteous to them and nice to them. So we need to always deal in a cooperative, working way, relationship with developers and industrial people, and new anybody who wants to come to town to be part of our community and to be synergistic with us and helping make it a success and positive. And adversarial relationships cannot be tolerated, especially at the selectman level. We can't do that. We've got to be open, and we've got to help, like they said at the last meeting. Let's get in and try to help all these people, and let's work with them. And this is not in any way a conflict of interest. This is good business teamwork. So, and it's especially important at any level in the town, but especially at the top of the company, which is the Board of Selectmen. So thank you, Board of Selectmen, for being positive about this, making the recommendation to Planning and Zoning, and I hope you're going to follow up with it. Let's get it to come true as soon as we can. Let's get going in this evolutionary way. Charles Darwin would be proud of us, and I'll be proud of you. So I don't have any more time now, so I'm going to say thank you for this evening, and I'll see you again next Friday, where I'll continue a bit more with this, and then move on to some more, I hope, results orientation. There is no meeting on Monday night of the Selectmen, so barring any real excitement this week, I should be able to talk a little bit more about some of the expediting solution techniques. But wherever I can in these programs, I'm going to show you from examples from the Selectmen meeting and around town meetings. I'm going to show you how we apply some of these things I've been talking to you about, and that's what I tried to do tonight. So we're going to keep weaving these things into these meetings, these examples from the town to show. And the next thing I want to talk about next week is the very important concept in business of evolution versus revolution. And that whenever you can, it's better for businesses to plan to do things on an evolutionary way than a revolutionary way. Thank you very much.